Hi there. I'm Dr. Myrdalis Diaz-Ramirez, and this is the Design Your Physician Life podcast. Welcome to this episode, brought to you by our maxAllure Mastermind, an exclusive mastermind for physician entrepreneurs. Today, we have a very special guest, Dr. Efrat Bruck from MDinspire, where she coaches pre-med students through medical school application process. We have a great conversation with Dr. Efrat Bruck about how to get to med school, how she helps others, and being a mompreneur. Are you ready? Let's go!
Welcome to the Design Your Physician Life podcast, where you will get excited about being a physician, learn the tools that can help boost your success, and great tips from successful doctors. Join us to unlock the keys to an amazing physician life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Myrdalis Diaz-Ramirez.
Hello and welcome to another episode. Today we have Dr. Efrat Bruck. She's talking to us from New York City. At the recording of this episode, she is a medical resident for anesthesiology in New York City at Mount Sinai. She is also an entrepreneur and a mom, and she's here to talk to us and give us tips about how to become a better applicant for medical school.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So welcome, and we're very excited to have you. You've had quite a career already without even starting to practice medicine. We're very proud of all the work that you've done. She has done videos where she's already helped thousands of students through her work. She has millions of views in her Khan Academy videos. Besides that, she's been helping pre-med students through her company MDinspire to get into medical school. And we're very happy to have her. And all this besides being a mom and also now going through residency. So welcome. Tell us a little bit about your story, how you became inspired to be a physician.
Yeah, of course. So I guess that would require a little bit of background about myself. So I'll start from the beginning. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I'm one of 10 children. I have 7 brothers and 2 sisters, and I'm number 7 in line. My father is a rabbi and a teacher in the local community. My mom was mostly a stay-at-home mom, but did work, sporadically throughout my childhood. Parents are immigrants. They immigrated to the U.S. from Israel about a year before I was born. And the reason for their migration is that one of my older brothers was born with congenital kidney failure. And I think the medical community in Israel is actually pretty advanced today. But at his time, it was actually a question of keeping him alive. They didn't know what to do with him. And they were like, your only hope is to come to the U.S. So that's what they did. They came with all their kids. And I was the first one in the family to be born in the U.S. right after they came. So I think when I look back, probably, the first thing I could point to as an inspiration was probably just my childhood revolving so much around my brother and his medical situation. So we lived in New York. That's where we settled, but he had a hospital in Minnesota. And my parents were constantly flying between New York and Minnesota. One parent would stay with the family. The other parent would go to Minnesota. So I think that was definitely a big thing that pulled me towards medicine. And growing up, I sort of understood that if not for the doctors who took care of him, he would never, he wouldn't be with us. So I think that was definitely a big thing. The other thing I would say is, when I look back at my childhood in school, and maybe this is something a lot of us can relate to, there are certain subjects that kind of felt very burdensome. And even though I was a great student in valedictorian in 8th grade and all that, I still at the end of the day, you'd rather play than sit through class. But I remember always liking my science classes and sort of not feeling, when recess ended, if there were science class after, I didn't have that same dread as some of the other subjects. So I just liked it. Like when I did my homework, I wasn't miserable. And, I would even read science books for fun. So I think that combination of just really enjoying science and then knowing that medicine was what kept my brother alive kind of pushed me in that direction. And then I'll say the third thing that sort of clinched it for me was in my senior year of college, I did a research project at Columbia University. I worked with Dr. Jonathan Barrage in a nephrology lab. And that was sort of the last thing that sort of pushed me in the direction, made me change course. I was a teacher at the time, made me change course and decide that I actually, want to move into medicine. So in short, those were the things that inspired me.
Well, that's awesome. There's a lot of inspiration early on for many physicians because their family has been involved in some sort of situation. So that's actually quite common for many. But you went a little bit further. And when you applied to medical school at the time, eventually you were accepted to 10 medical schools, which is really
almost 10.
something. Almost 10. So tell me the almost 10. What happened?
I have to go back to look at the numbers. I think I was accepted to 8 and waitlisted at 2, if I remember correctly. One of the 2 I was waitlisted at, I think, was Stanford. I don't remember the other one. I have to go and look back, but I was accepted to 8 U.S. medical schools.
So tell me, how did you get to be accepted to 8 medical schools and be on wait list to 2 medical schools?
So, okay, I guess this also requires some backtracking that maybe I glossed over in the initial part. But so when I finished high school, I didn't go to college right away. The expectation in my family was sort of to, when you finish with school, you go out and you work and you become independent, financially independent in other ways. And it was also, I went to a more conservative Jewish high school where going to college was not the expectation and there was no preparation for it anyway. So after high school, I spent 1 year in what was expected sort of a teaching program. I got a teaching certificate, and the year after I started teaching. So I had a 8-year career as a high school teacher before I applied to medical school. I started teaching when I was, I think, 18. I sort of had a fully fleshed out career before even applying to medical school, probably helped with that process. This is not to say that if you're coming right out of college that you can't get accepted to school and be really successful in the application process. It's not what I'm saying, but definitely if you have other things that admission committees see, that you're an asset, you bring certain things to the table that, that other applicants don't bring to the table, it makes you stand out. So I'm sure that has something, to do with it. The other thing I would say is, I did well in college. I always tell people the number one priority is, you have to get good grades and do well on the MCAT, because without that, you can't even really get an interview. Then, of course, there are other things that are important. So for sure, that was, an important part of the equation. And then at the time that I applied, I think I had already started working for Khan Academy. That was definitely something that made me stand out, because the way I got to make videos for them was, winning a national competition. So if you can prove that, you're able to stand out, not just on a local level, but on a national level, it's something that would boost your application.
So let's define this thing about traditional applicant and non-traditional applicant for our listeners. What's a traditional applicant and what's a non-traditional applicant? Which one were you at the time of your application?
Sure. When we speak about a traditional applicant, we mean someone who follows sort of the regular course of, finish high school, then go to college, maybe take a gap year, maybe not, and then go straight to medical school. So they're going to be, let's say you finish college at 21, 22. I think if you take a gap year, you could still be considered a traditional student. I don't think one gap year puts you over to the non-traditional. But you'd be starting medical school when you're like around 23-ish or something like that. So that's a traditional applicant, right? High school, college, med school. A non-traditional applicant is someone like me, you kind of meander about and do other things, and you apply to medical school a little bit later. So like I was the second half of my 20s already by the time I was applying to medical school. I think both can be very, very successful in the application process. I don't think you should try to pick, which one has a better chance and do that. Like, you should drive your life and go where you want to go. But I think each of them has a very good chance of getting into medical school. They would each require different strategies.
So by your time of application, you had already done research and you had taught and you had created this video. So tell us a little bit about how, I know that you won a national competition to be able to get into the Khan Academy. So tell us about that process right there, and then what you did after entering into the Khan Academy.
Sure. So I had taken my MCAT in January, I think, of 2014. I wanted to take it in June of 2013, but my practice scores were not where I wanted them to be. So I did what I now advise people to do, which is push it off until your practice scores are where you want them to be, because most people score around the same range as their practice scores, because it's a standardized exam. So then
can you explain what that practice consists of?
Yeah. So I tell people you should have 3 consecutive practice exams, actual like AAMC practice exams that are in the range that you want. Not 1, not 2, but 3. And the other little tidbit I'll throw in, although this is not a full-on discussion about the MCAT, that could probably be a whole podcast in itself, is that the timeline for studying, I tell people that you need a minimum of 3 months of studying full time for the MCAT, and you should not start those 3 months unless you're scoring already a median score. So today that would be a 500. In my days, it would have been like a 25. Like you can't start your 3 dedicated months until you're at the mean, because those 3 months are not for building from scratch. They're for, kind of taking yourself from average to a lot better than average, which is what you need to get into medical school. So that's a little tidbit I'll throw in. But getting back to how the Khan Academy thing happened, I took my MCAT in January 2014, and then I had all this kind of time till I was applying. Applications would open up till May or June. And I was actually in my mind, thinking like, what can I do that would make my application stand out? And this brings me to something else about when applying to medical school. I tell people, look at your application and separate those things that you can change and those things that you can't change. That people will fret over grades that they have, things like that. And I tell them, you can't change it. Just don't even spend an ounce of energy worrying about it. Look at your application and see what you can make better. The things you can't change, forget about them. The things you can make better, work on that. And this is sort of the strategy I took. What can I do? So I went back to work at the lab where I was doing research, and then I saw this competition, and I remember sitting on it for a week about whether or not I should apply, like percolating. And what was holding me back was I needed a tablet, and I didn't have one. It would require driving down to a store and talking to someone about which tablet to get. And I couldn't get myself to just go to the store and get the tablet. I know it sounds so silly in retrospect, but I didn't want to take the time to go buy a tablet and take the time to learn how to use it, even though I really wanted to enter this competition. And then I kind of thought to myself that, if this does pan out, this will do a lot more for my application than volunteering another 100 hours somewhere, because everybody volunteers, and, volunteering is great and it's nice, but it's a little bit of a checkbox sometimes. It's not something that makes you stand out. It's not something that necessarily will make you unique. And the other thing was I really liked Khan Academy, and I was already a teacher. This was stuff that I liked. I liked teaching and I liked science. So I finally made that trip down to Best Buy. I still remember I spent at least an hour with a salesperson looking at all the tablets, and I finally got the stupid tablet that was holding me back. And, once I got the tablet, it was all, easy from there. Learning how to use it took me, I don't know, maybe an hour or two. And then it becomes a little bit addicting, it became addicting. I made the videos, I submitted them, and I was like, okay, we'll see what happens. At the end of the day, I maybe spent, I don't know, not more than 20 hours, making the videos to apply. It was a very, 20 hours well spent. And then, once they chose the winners, paid trip, we went to San Francisco, we all met. And I think there were maybe 14, 15, 20 of us, maybe 15. And then, half of us were then hired to work for Khan Academy. That's how that happened.
So how long did you work with them, and how many videos did you do, and what happened to those videos?
Yeah, so the training was about, I think we trained, it was like a week or 10 days of training. And then, in person, and the rest of it was remote. I made about 30 videos for them in total. And, in combined, the views are in the millions. Individually, they each have like, in the 100,000s of views. And then in addition to making videos, I also helped them like review their other videos. Like there was an entire MCAT platform that they were trying to build. So someone needed to review the other videos and go through it with a fine tooth comb and actually see that they covered every single point on the AMC map for the MCAT. And this work spanned like probably starting around June of 2014 when I applied to medical school. And then I kept working in a little bit throughout my first year of medical school too.
That's awesome.
So yeah,
That's
you can find them on YouTube.
I
think they were once on the AMC website. I don't know if they're on there anymore. And some of them are still on the Khan Academy website. Some of them have been redone since, but you can find them all on YouTube.
So an important thing is that you took that job on MCAT material after you had already taken the MCAT.
Correct.
And applied to medical school. So it wasn't like the other way around. Having that work, that job did not help you to get into medical school with the knowledge, but it helped you with saying, here I am, I'm a non-traditional applicant. I take risks. I've taken this other job, and this is me as an educator and as a medical school applicant. So that's really a good way of plumping your application, if you want to say that.
By the time I applied, I didn't start making the videos for them. I only won the competition. But then by the time I was interviewing, I already made like 15 videos. And actually, I interviewed at Mount Sinai. Dr. Valerie Parkis, who's the Dean of Admissions, interviewed me, and we watched a part of one of my videos. So the videos were already up by the time I was interviewing.
That's amazing. So let's move on then. You were accepted to the 8 medical schools. You accepted to go to Mount Sinai, correct?
Yeah.
What made you make that decision? to go to Mount Sinai?
Simply put, my husband and I sat down together and he's like, you should go to the best medical school you get into. So that's the short answer. I thought it was the best medical school I got accepted to. Had I gotten off the wait list at Stanford, would I go? Probably. I guess that's the simple reason. But I mean, I'm from New York. And, when I applied to medical school, I looked at the map and I was like, 5 hours north, 5 hours south, 5 hours west of New York is basically where I'm applying. I wanted to stay near family, which was a very good choice because you need a lot of support during medical school, especially as a parent. So I definitely have no regrets. And I think Mount Sinai is an excellent medical school that I would recommend if you get in, you should run there.
So fast forward, you get into medical school. Now you're on your residency from graduating, and now you're also part of the admissions committee at the medical school, correct?
So I did work in admissions while I was a medical student at Mount Sinai. I no longer do that work because you can only do that work when you're a medical student, but yes.
So tell us about that process of helping choose other medical students coming to your same school.
So I'm going to flip the question a little. It'll answer your question, but I'm just going to frame it as in if someone were asking me, what can I do to make myself the best possible applicant? What would I say? So the first thing I think I sort of mentioned before about taking a hard look at your application, separate the things you can change and the things you cannot. Things you cannot change, forget about them, not worth your energy. The things you can change, work on that. So if your GPA is not great and you're doing a post-bac, make sure to get really good grades. And I know someone like this who had a very low GPA for medical school applicants. I think she was, sick for a year or two of college, had a below 3.0, like a 2 point something, but she really wanted to go to medical school. She got her post-bac and she got a 3.9 and she got into medical school. There are ways to show people that you made a mistake, but you fixed it and you grew and you learned from your mistakes. That's one of the really important things that admissions committees like to look at. Like, do you know how to take your mistakes, process them, and move on?
So
because
in that point, how do you do a post-bac?
So a post-bac is for people who went to college and did not think they're going to go to medical school or didn't think about it. And let's say you went to college and majored in economics and I don't know, you worked in finance for a year or two, and then you wake up and decide you want to go to medical school. But you didn't do any of your required prerequisites, which most people do in college. So what are you going to do? So that's why post-bacs were invented. You can do something called a post-bac, which is between 1 and 2 years, depending on where you do it. I think most of them are more like 1.5 years. A post-baccalaureate program that will cover all of your pre-medical prerequisites. So like biology and chemistry and physics. Admissions committees will look at this. It will be just as important or more important than your undergraduate GPA. I know a lot of people who did this. It's extremely common, and you're not going to be considered a second-class applicant because you did a post-bac. You will be at completely equal footing as every other applicant. So don't worry about that part. Sometimes people worry about this part. Like, if I'm not a traditional applicant, like, am I automatically like second class? And the answer is no. Is the straight out answer, you are not second class at all. You're viewed differently, and now there's more things to look at as an applicant, but you absolutely have the same opportunity as every other traditional applicant. At least I think so. So that's what a post-bac is. The other thing I would say, which is really important, this is one of the most common questions I get from applicants. They ask me, which extracurriculars should I do? And they're expecting some secret sauce answer. Like, if you do this one and that one and that one, like, that's the special recipe to get you in. And the truth is, there is no secret sauce answer of extracurricular activities to do that will get you into medical school. I tell people, yes, sometimes you have to check a couple of boxes. Like, somewhere in there, you have to have some clinical exposure and volunteering. But the bottom line is, get to know yourself and choose extracurricular activities that you're passionate about, that drive you, because that will make you the best applicant. Admissions committees like to see people who are passionate and driven. And that doesn't happen by, taking a checklist and checking boxes off like, oh, volunteering, oh, research. That's not how it happens. It happens when you choose activities that drive you, that you're passionate about. It's not always easy because sometimes 20-year-olds or 19-year-olds don't know what drives them and what they're passionate about. So I tell them, well, now is your chance to learn. Now's your chance to explore that and figure that out. The third thing I'll say, which is so simple, but many people miss this, is make sure you apply on time. Don't submit your application late. This is very low-hanging fruit. It's the easiest thing to get right. And for some reason, so many people don't do this. Most schools, operate on a rolling basis. So the higher up you are on that application pile, the better your chances. I would say applying on time means within 6 to 8 weeks of the application opening, max. The earlier, the better. Like if you can have it submitted the day it opens, that's the best. And don't forget, when you apply to medical school, there's a lot of verification that has to happen on AMCAS's side. They have to verify your transcripts. They have to get your letters of recommendation. All that you have no control over. You don't know if it's going to take a day or if it's going to take, 30 days. So you're really shooting yourself in the foot by applying late. I can't emphasize how, what an easy thing this is to do and how much it helps you. I always tell people, if you apply late, it knocks a couple of points off your value as an applicant. If let's say you were an 8, if you apply late, you're now a 6. Why would you do that to yourself? Just apply on time.
That's awesome. We have 3 great tips from Efrat here, Dr. Brooks, who's worked before in an application committee. I do want to talk a little bit about what MDinspire is and how it helps future medical students, applicants to make their application better. And in general, what that process is, because I know that many people will just say, I'll wing this, I'll do it on my own, or I don't have the resources. And there's many different things that are limiting them in looking for resources. But there's a lot of other people who do use these resources. So tell us about MDinspire and how it helps future applicants.
Yeah. Some of those people who think they need the help but want to wing it, I get them after. I get them later. So I guess to explain how MDinspire was born, I have to explain a little bit about my own personal journey and what I felt was holding me back when I was applying to medical school. I went to a conservative Jewish high school where, going to college was not really the thing to do, and definitely going to medical school was completely out of bounds. So I really was lacking. And as far educationally, I had a high school diploma and I took the New York State Regents, but it was definitely not a robust education. There were a lot of gaps in my education. So when I decided one day I want to try to go to medical school, and I started talking to people and kind of looking at who I was and what I had to offer, there were some gaps there, both educationally and in other ways. And it took me a while to learn and pick up on different things. I always tell people this, it's so embarrassing, but when I started medical school, I didn't even understand the timeline of the difference between a resident and a fellow and an attending. I remember somebody in my first week of medical school explaining that to me. So I had those gaps.
It's a very common thing. Most don't know that, really.
Right. That's true. Maybe I shouldn't feel so bad about that. But I was definitely, to give you a sense of just how sheltered I was, when I met my husband, I asked him which college he went to, and he told me he went to Stanford University. And I had never heard of it. I remember I went to Google it. I was like, oh, wait, that sounds like a really good college. I never heard of Stanford University. I didn't have, all the kind of stuff that, a senior in high school would be applying to college and figuring out what they want to do and learning. I didn't have any of that. And then the other thing is I was sort of expected to finance my college education. My parents didn't help pay for it. So I worked throughout college the entire time and paid. I got some of it funded with financial aid, and I got academic scholarships, but there was still a pretty large amount to still pay on my own, which, I worked throughout college and I financed college. And those two things are a big deal for people. Being able to, if you want to take a course or you want to do something, you have to be able to pay for it. And not everybody has parents who can, pay for these expensive MCAT courses or even pay for college or other things. So, when I see people who have barriers, I always tell people you need 3 things to go to medical school. You need to have some sort of, the innate intelligence to do it. You need to want it. I would never push someone to go to medical school. And I don't think anyone should be pushed. You have to be self-inspired. And the third thing you need to have the ability to do it, right? Some people have 1 and 2, but they don't have the ability because maybe they have a family, or maybe they don't have the financial resources to go to college, or maybe they come from a really sheltered community, like me, not knowing a single female physician growing up. So I can't help with 1 and 2, but my job is to help with number 3, right? If you feel like you have barriers, educational or financial or other types of barriers holding you back, that's where I come in. So the way MDinspire was born, to get back to your question, is I had a few admissions companies reach out to me, probably because of my teaching experience and other things, to come on board and, work as an advisor for them. And, a simple search on their website, looking at the prices these companies charge, it is impossible, unless someone had a lucrative career for a while before medical school, it is impossible for an undergraduate to afford those prices without someone else footing the bill. And I felt like this is not what I want to do. I don't want to only help those people where mom and dad can foot the bill. I want to help people like myself who were working, and people who, I mean, we're talking like 5 digits, right, is what it costs. And I will be providing exactly the same service, right? I mean, these companies tried to get me to work for them. I'm providing exactly the same service, but I'm charging prices that I would have been able to afford as a pre-med. I was working, I would have been able to afford. I have the things I do broken down sort of into units, and it's $100 per unit, right? So for example, getting a personal statement edited is $100. If you want one edit, that's something I would have been able to afford as a pre-med. And that's sort of what I want to keep. My website is not as fancy as those companies. You'll see, it's a simple website, and I don't have a customer service line, but I'm giving the exact same product. So that's how MDinspire was born.
Excellent. And then what do you think would be your highest or your best achievement, or what has made you most proud of?
So I think just having come to this point of graduating medical school and being a resident in training is probably my largest professional accomplishment, plus Khan Academy because of the broadness, the scope of the impact. But I think it's more that I'm proud that I did this while starting a family. The fact that I've been able to do this and I didn't have to sacrifice my personal life, but that I have, 2 children along the way who are growing and families along the way, I think is what I'm most proud of.
Okay. So, Dr. Bruck, can you tell us your best studying tips for students?
Absolutely. So I have 3. The first one is, and I know this might sound trivial, but it's not. The first is to get enough sleep, like physical sleep, throughout the day. So I see a lot of students scrimping on sleep. And I think as a culture, we're very disrespectful of sleep. I tell people, this is not something to cut back on. You might get something in the short term. It might help you, like just to pass one exam, but in the long term, not getting enough sleep really harms you. And the reason for that is that long-term memory is solidified when you sleep. Like there's an actual physiological process that helps you form long-term memories that happens only when you sleep. And I learned this the hard way. When I had my first daughter, I was getting some sleep, but not enough sleep. And then when I started studying for my board exam, everything I had learned that year, in the first 6 months of my daughter's life, brain was like blank, even though I passed all of my exams and did very well on some of them, but nothing stuck in the long term. And I sort of had to put in a lot of work to relearn everything I learned. So that would be my first thing, is to get enough sleep. The second thing is I would encourage people to start using Anki, which is a flashcard application that nearly everyone at this point, I think, uses in medical school. It's for memorization. It's extremely, extremely powerful. And it's active learning. And that gets me to my next thing. It's, you, as much as possible, try to do active learning as opposed to passive. So like reading is passive learning. I think the last time I really studied from a textbook was in high school or college. Reading is passive learning. It doesn't help you form memories very well. The best thing is to do Anki, flashcards, to do questions, and also to teach other people. So like having a study partner or teaching other people. And then the third thing I would say is there are a lot of very concentrated spurts of studying you have when you're a pre-med and medical student. But after every concentrated spurt, you should always have a recovery time and a time to rest. So as much as I worked hard in undergrad, it was difficult sometimes. I always made sure to build in times for recuperation and recovery after the concentrated time periods of studying.
That's amazing. Obviously, when I was going to medical school, there was no Anki. What we did to be able to work in a similar way was that we would go to the conferences, the lectures, and then we would have somebody record everything, do the transcriptions, and then over the transcriptions, we would do like these questions and then write on the side all over again. So that was our way of active. And then eventually we would ask each other questions and then meet to
exactly
practice questions like that. Yeah.
Yeah. The more active it is, the more it actually sticks long term.
We know that you have been through medical school already, and we know that you're a resident. So we're going to start at that point. Let's start with you becoming a mom.
Yeah. So before I talk about it, I have to give a disclaimer, and I say this all the time. I don't really recommend it. It's extremely difficult. And, obviously there are a lot of different factors that, go into play when deciding, when to start a family and at what point in your life. But, if you were fortunate to have your life set up where, this question is not at your doorstep when you're in medical school, then, I'd kind of go with that and it's very difficult. So I don't know if I recommend it. But that disclaimer aside, for those of you who are thinking about this and do want to juggle family with medical school, I guess I'll share my personal story. So my first daughter was born in my first summer of medical school, so between year 1 and year 2. And then my second daughter was born in what would have been my 4th year of medical school, but I did medical school in 6 years. So I took 2 decelerated years, which is something that they do at Mount Sinai for people with families or, other circumstances. A decelerated year is you take 1 year of medical school, usually it's your 3rd year because that's the hardest year, and you split it over 2 years and you set it up in a way that's, convenient for your personal life. So for me, for example, I set it up in a way where like my 3rd year, I had a year 3A, year 3B. I basically got 80% of my clerkships done in my year 3A. And then when year 3B started, the whole beginning of the year, I took off because my daughter was born then. So I was able to take a significant chunk of time off before then, resuming. And then I did the same thing with my 4th year, because what gets really difficult also with children is taking board exams. You don't have that same, you can't do those same concentrated periods of studying when you're a parent that you can do, when you're not a parent, because you can't tell your kids I'm disappearing from your life for 2 months. So it really helps with board exams. It gives you a little bit more time to study. The decelerated years also helped with, shelf exams during clerkships. During my, my second pregnancy, I was doing surgery and OB-GYN, and with those clerkships, I was able to sort of have, I finished a clerkship. I didn't have to take the shelf exam, on the last day of the clerkship as you traditionally do, but I would take an extra 2 weeks, for example, to study. So that's kind of the practical way of how I did it. Is I took extra time for medical school, and I recommend that if it's something your school does, I recommend people who are parents to do this. If it's not something they do, why don't you bring it up to them and see if they can do it? At Sinai, with the tuition, they just split it over 2 years. So you're not actually paying more tuition. You just have to consider the opportunity cost of being in medical school 1 more year. And, when people ask me, how do you do it? Right. So I think they're asking 2 different questions. I think they're asking, how do you do it from a psychological and emotional side? Like, how do you manage it all? And then they're asking practically, how do you do it? So those are 2, different things. I think the first one is more important, the psychological or emotional aspect of, how do you develop the bandwidth to do 2 things that for most people, each of those is a full-time endeavor, because being a parent is, a full-time endeavor. And of course, being in medical training is a full-time endeavor. And, I'm sure if you ask 10 different people, you'll get 10 different answers. But my answer is you have to have a very clear vision of why you're doing what you're doing and what you want your life to look like when the hard part is over. When you have a vision of, why you're doing this, where you're going, where you're headed, your bandwidth becomes larger, and it's much easier to juggle the things you're doing. Those really difficult times where the baby's tiny and they're not letting you sleep, and they're, they cry louder and they're getting sick all the time, and you're a medical student, that doesn't last forever. They grow up, it gets a little easier. Medical training, it's still demanding, but I still think I'm finding it easier to be a resident than it was to be a medical student, because the satisfaction that you get from actually doing your job and being a doctor, I find kind of gives you a lot more push than just being a medical student. Maybe that's just me, but you have to remember the hard parts will be over, and why am I doing this? And that sort of gives you the drive to do it. So that's the emotional, psychological part. And then equally important is you need people close to you who are supporting you. It would not be possible for me to do what I was doing without the support of the people close to me. So, for me, most significant was the support of my husband, where he's, not only wants me to pursue my dreams and be inspired and become a doctor, but he's also an actual, he's kind of a stakeholder in this whole endeavor, right? Like, we're family, and everything I become, I bring to the table. We all sort of benefit from that. So there's no question that I would have never been able to do this without my husband's unwavering support. And then my immediate family is also very supportive, and that really, really helps. So you need people who emotionally are going to be there for you, people who believe in you, and people who are going to remind you why you did this, and remind you that, you're going to finish this. And then if you want to talk like practically the day-to-day, how are you actually a parent with medical school, is I tell people, if you're going to do this, you have to have multiple layers of pragmatic support, right? You can't just send your kid to school and that's it. You need, a couple of layers. So for example, when our kids were little, with my first story, it was a little simpler. So we had a daycare. And then on top of the daycare, we had like a rotating list of babysitters that would help us in the evenings and the weekend. And then for more difficult times, like when my second daughter was born, or when I was taking a board exam, then our family would step in and help. So it's not enough to just have like one entity of practical support, but you need a couple of them, so to start, thinking about what those entities can be for you.
So you mentioned a lot of things there, very important for when somebody has, starting a family and they're going through their medical career. Many times people will ask us, when is the best time to have a child? And it's not necessarily if you're going through medical school or if you're going to residency or applying to your first job. It's really many times you have that support, because you can be in any of those stages and not have the support. And if you're deciding to have a child with a partner, then it's important that that partner is there for you. If you don't have that partner, you have to have somebody who's going to be able to pick up a child, help you with taking them to the doctor if you cannot do that day, or as you say, for that studying, having somebody, and then having the financial support to go through all these things. So once you have those things in place, that becomes easier and doable. Not impossible, but better to help also to avoid burnout. So in your case, you were not planning to have applied to a decelerated program and using that for
Correct.
medical school, and you were not planning to have a child during your medical school, and it just happened to you that you had all these things. So if somebody can plan, looking at those programs first in state close to your family where you have all that
Right.
support, and having these type of programs which are not necessarily available everywhere are things that can be good tips to look at, correct?
Yes, I would say the best homework you can do is talking to people in the school, and not on your interview day when everybody's around. And of course, no one's going to, tell you something that doesn't sound excellent and flattering for the school. But, sort of talk to people in the school, get a sense. I mean, how many parents are there? What have they done for parents? So with me taking the decelerated year, it was actually Sinai's idea. I didn't even know such a thing existed. They were the ones who suggested it. A lot of times people will take like a research year or a year off, but that doesn't really help you. Then you still have that really difficult year of medical school. It was actually Sinai's suggestion that I initially didn't want to do, but then, the more I thought about it, it made perfect sense and I was convinced. So I think speaking to people in the schools, getting a sense of how many people are parents, how they feel, are they supported? Does the school work with them? These are all extremely important questions that you can, ask people who are there.
Okay, so you mentioned 3 resources there already. One, decelerated program, one taking the time off, and the other one is research year, which, can be available.
Right.
And there might be some other different solutions at different schools. So you didn't only decide to go through medical school and then it happened that you had 2 babies with your husband. You also decided to become an entrepreneur. And now you have MDinspire.com. So tell us about how you're juggling that now that you're a resident, a mom, and, a wife.
Yeah. So, MDinspire was born when I took my 4th year, was also decelerated. But COVID hit, and then our elective time was cut in half. So I think, we were required to do 28 weeks of elective to graduate. And I already did 14. I think I did even more. I did already 16 weeks in my first year 4, and I was planning to do the rest in my year 4B, but because COVID hit and it was very difficult for the students behind me to catch up because all their clerkships were canceled and a few canceled months. So suddenly I had, free time that wasn't the initial plan. So that's actually how MDinspire was born. I don't know if it would have happened otherwise. I did a lot of coaching and sort of helping people with applications before MDinspire, but not in an official capacity, like starting a company and all that. So that's sort of, sometimes life throws at you a pocket of time that you didn't expect. So I decided to do something with it. The other thing is we do live in New York City with 2 children, and I probably don't have to tell our audience, that the cost of living, especially with a family in New York City, is pretty exorbitant. And as residents, we make a pretty, low salary. So I thought this would be a great way to sort of boost our income a little bit. And I actually initially, struggled, with the thought of adding more responsibilities to my plate as a resident, and almost didn't, start MDinspire. I was like, what's the point of starting this if I won't be able to carry on? And then I was reminded of something I read in Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, I think it was. It's a great book with lots of good tips, but to be honest, there's only one thing I actually remember from the whole book, but it was probably worth reading this book just to remember this one tidbit. She talks about how sometimes women will cut back on their endeavors in preparation for life changes before the life change is even relevant, right? So like, I think she brought an example of a woman who came to her and was like, I want to work less hours because I want to find a partner and have a family. And Sheryl asked her, like, do you even have a partner right now with whom you plan on having a baby? And she's like, no, but, so Sheryl said to her, come to me when you're pregnant, come to me then. It's not wise to cut back before those things are relevant, because the further along you are, the more flexibility you're actually building yourself, so get to the maximum point and then think about taking off and what you need to have that baby. So I sort of went along with her. So I was, you know what, I'll start MDinspire. And if it doesn't pan out, so it doesn't pan out, but let's see what happens. And I'm finding that it's not that difficult to squeeze in, a couple of hours here, a couple of hours there. Some weeks are more busy and some weeks are less busy, but it's not as difficult as I thought it would be. So I would encourage people to, try things out, see how it goes. And also, when you're working on a project, but you also are like a medical resident, you have to be realistic, right? This is going to be a crockpot type of endeavor. It's not going to be a pressure cooker, right? This is going to be something that's sitting on my back burner and simmering over the next couple of years. It's not a full-on business that I'm like advertising everywhere and speaking to people and trying to recruit, people. It's basically, it's on a back burner, and I have a slow, steady stream of people coming to me. And I'm very happy with that. I guess is basically what's going on with MDinspire right now.
Did you have somebody give you tips, anybody mentoring you to become an entrepreneur, the first steps of doing your company? How did you come about that?
I don't have one person sort of mentoring me and guiding me, but I sort of told myself that if I've been able to do medical school, being a parent, like I could probably do this too. I think we underestimate, how capable we are. Especially in medicine, medicine has this way of keeping us so hyper-focused on medicine and and then I remind myself, like, if I was able to stand out in so many different ways during the application process, like I can do this too. And that doesn't mean I didn't ask people for help, but the initial drive was kind of like, what makes me think I can't do this? There were so many other things I've done. This is probably something I can do too. And then, but for each like discrete step, I definitely had people helping me. I mean, I don't think I could build a website for the life of me. I had someone help me with that. And if the accounting gets more complicated, that's going to move straight to my husband. Right now it's very simple, but that's going to move to my husband because he is much, much better at that. Anything numbers related than me. And I hate Excel. I think it's right now, it's like a slow simmer thing. And as it grows, I'm going to have to reach out to people and seek help. There's no question.
So tell us a little bit about what MDinspire specifically does for future medical students, hopefully, right, as applicants.
Yeah. MDinspire, the point is, for medical school applicants to be able to get professional consulting for their application for reasonable fees, right? So I want people to be able to pay themselves and not necessarily have to rely on their parents to pay for them. All the prices are in ranges that I think are very reasonable that I would have been able to afford, as a working pre-med. So what I do is I help people review their applications. So for example, I help people review their personal statements, their activities section. I do mock interviews with people where we prep for their various interviews. And then I also coach people on various studying tips. For example, I help people set up Anki. It's a bit of a learning curve, and definitely if you want to do this on your own, there's lots of YouTube videos and resources on how to set up Anki. But sometimes somebody just wants a real life person to walk them through the process and show them how to use it and coach them. So I help do that as well. And then I do a lot of advising, which actually right now I do most of that for free. I don't charge people for that. They have questions, they have various options on the table. They want to know which one is going to optimize and maximize their chances of getting into medical school. So I do a lot of advising.
So tell us a little bit about the support from your husband for, even before deciding to go to medical school, going to medical school, then having a family and now an entrepreneur. How is that working for you guys?
Yeah. So, I mean, it started off as a beautiful dream that wasn't that difficult, right? Like, I sort of wanted to, I come from a really insular background. I didn't know a single female physician growing up. My parents are immigrants. Financially, our family struggled growing up, not because my parents are not hardworking or not smart or not talented. They're all of the above, but they did have 10 children and, they were immigrants. So, and especially with so much of their energy being funneled into my brother who was sick. So, my husband understood why this is a dream for me. He understood that this was about being able to sort of step out of my boundaries and accomplish a goal that for many other people in my shoes would have never been possible. I think when he finally understood this, it went from like, yeah, sure, like, why not, to like, you're going to do this. Like he, when he saw how important it is for me, and, this had been my dream since I was a child, was not able to be materialized. I had his full on support, and he was my biggest cheerleader. He helped me study for the MCAT. He's really good at math and physics. And I was really jealous when he could like just open up a physics, book and like answer the questions on the spot without like reading anything. And he has a much, much stronger, secular education background than I did. I didn't have APs in high school. I didn't know what an AP course was until I went to college. So there was a sort of a vision for the two of us that, I'm going to do this. And he's been supportive from the beginning. When I was applying to medical school, my husband was applying to jobs as an actuarial consultant, and he took a job in Massachusetts at the time. And I still didn't know where I'd go to medical school. I think I was considering Dartmouth, which was, higher up there. And I did interview at Harvard, but that didn't pan out. So he took a job in Massachusetts, and he was like, you'll go to the best medical school you get into. And if I have to, I'm going to travel. So for the whole first year of medical school, when we decided together that I'd go to Mount Sinai, I was actually in New York, and he traveled to work. So he was there 4 days a week. And then on Fridays, he would work from home. So, there was definitely a commitment and a support that we're going to do this together. It was never just me. It was never that I'm becoming a doctor. It's that, we're all in this together. But then, it gets harder. The path it's not, straight and easy, because once I had my first daughter, like, how's that going to work? So, he did get, leave. So he was able to take 3 months, which was really excellent. I would encourage people to do that. If your spouse can take some time off when a child is born, I mean, you're never going to get that time back, right? You could always make those 3 months of work up,
we
later.
got
But
6 months together for our twins.
Wow.
We got 6 months together
Wow.
alone at the house. So we were able to, we had the ability to do that. And it's very important at the beginning of a family to have that time. And we were very fortunate. So if anybody can plan for that, we would highly recommend it. As we're closing here, I do have a question about you. How do you see yourself in the future, and what sort of things would you think that you might want your children to know now that you're a physician, a mom, and an entrepreneur?
So the first thing I would, as a parent, I would never push my children towards a career as a physician. I have a feeling they might, themselves, they're going to want to, I mean, my kids tell me all the time, I want to be a doctor mom or a mom doctor. It might happen on its own because, usually children learn from who their parents are. So I would never push them toward it. But if they wanted to do it, they would have my full on support. Although I had more of a twisty, windy journey, and I went to medical school a little bit later than most people, I would encourage, my own children to try to do it earlier on, so that it's not as difficult. In other words, get as much of your school and training out of the way before you start a family, so that it's a little bit less challenging. And that when you do start a family, you're sort of at the end of your training tail, or more towards the end than the beginning. And then it's not as hard to juggle everything. It doesn't work out that way for everyone. But that's what I would want for my own children. And I would want them to go where their heart takes them and what they're passionate about. I would never push them to do something that they're not excited about and passionate about, something that they feel strongly about.
Well, thank you very much. It's been an honor to meet you. It's been quite a great time being and juggling all these things. I cannot imagine when I was in medical school having had children and juggling all that stuff, and also being even married. I was a normal person going through life, just going from college to medical school, residency. I did get married at the end of medical school, but having children, I would have seen that as way more challenging, not impossible. And I'm glad that you have been able to be successful at that. And,
I thought it was great to be married in medical school. I think being married in medical school is great. I didn't feel that it added any sort of extra difficulty to my life. It was great. I had like a built-in supportive person in my life. My husband was away during most of the week anyway. So like I would study during the week and then we'd have the weekend together. But, children is a whole other story. I mean, that definitely makes your life a lot more difficult and complicated.
Well, thank you very much. Is there a way that our listeners can reach you for MDinspire?
Yeah. So there's a form on the website that you can fill out, which gets sent to my email. You can also find me on LinkedIn. You can always, DM me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. And for those of you who want to directly email, you can also email me at ebruck, EBRUCK 613 @gmail.com.
Well, thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Well, guys, that's it for today. Stay tuned for more of our Design Your Physician Life podcast, which was brought to you today by our maxAllure Mastermind, an exclusive mastermind for physician entrepreneurs. We will continue to bring you useful resources to develop your physician entrepreneur life like we did today with Dr. Efrat Bruck. You can actually find her at MDinspire.com, where she helps future medical students seamlessly weave their stories for their medical school applications. Thank you for joining us. We hope you had a great time like we did today. Stay in touch. Please visit our website, www.maxallure.com. That is MAXALLURE. And please don't forget to subscribe, like us, give us 5 stars if you really enjoyed this program, and share the love with your family and friends. See you later. Thank you. Bye.
Please remember that Design is not providing specific financial, medical, or career advice. Our only intent is to stimulate your appetite for growth by sharing our experience and those of our speakers, coaches, and guests. Your personal growth and success will be unique to your circumstances and your hard work. We sincerely hope you enjoyed the show and look forward to seeing you next week.